Welcome to the In 2 Minutes or Less Sideline Review. Today we're going to be talking about Riddell's new DTX1 shoulder pad system. And I can hear you already. Oh, great. Another set of shoulder pads that we have to be worried about. And yes, that is true. But it is our job to understand the technology and protective equipment that our athletes might be wearing so that we can better manage those in an injury situation. Because it is our ability to manage that protective equipment in an emergency situation that will drive outcomes for the injured athlete. But what happens when that advanced technology complicates our ability to perform critical care tasks in the setting of a critically injured athlete? Let's go to the SMC Sim Lab and find out. One thing for sure, Riddell is a conscientious manufacturer of protective athletic equipment, investing a lot of time and resources into research of their products. And they've also come here to the SMC Sim Lab multiple times over the last couple of years, asking us for some help with the development of the Axiom football helmet, and now most recently with the DTX1 shoulder pad. In this case, Riddell sent us multiple samples of the DTX1 shoulder pad and asked us to put it through its paces. So we took these shoulder pads to the SMC Sim Lab where we evaluated how the shoulder pads respond to traditional management protocols when we are caring for a critically injured athlete. During this review, we came up with 3 questions that we wanted to answer, and I think they're pretty reflective of questions most people have when a new set of shoulder pads comes out. On our way to answering these questions, we developed a number of tips and tactics that we'll share with you that we think will stimulate conversation amongst your medical team and help you develop an approach to manage the DTX1 shoulder pad. Okay, question number 1 deals specifically with safe patient handling. Specifically, will the DTX1 shoulder pad complicate our ability to perform a good log roll maneuver? And we found, in fact, that no. The DTX1 shoulder pad does not complicate our ability to perform a log roll maneuver relative to any other shoulder pad that's on the market. In fact, in this video segment, you'll see that I drew a red line going from the torso to the headline so that you'd be able to see there's very little movement of the cervical spine during the log roll maneuver. And of course, one of the most important parts of repositioning an athlete is to place them in cervical neutral position. And as you see here, again, indicated by the red line, we have no problem whatsoever log rolling the athlete and placing them in cervical neutral position.
1, 2, 3. And down on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, question number 2 looks specifically at our ability to perform compressions on an athlete wearing the DTX1 shoulder pad. Now remember, in the case of a sudden cardiac arrest, our primary objective is to reestablish forward-moving blood flow. And at least initially, that's going to be done with the onset of compressions. Effective compressions, remember, is a function of rate of compression, depth of compression, and chest recoil. Now, a pretty common question over the years has been, can we do compressions over the shoulder pads? And I think in our observation, the ultimate answer has been no. But we wanted to look specifically at that question relative to the DTX1 shoulder pad. So we put the DTX1 shoulder pad on our patient simulator and ran a CPR protocol, recording the data along the way. And as you can see here, we were able to do effective compressions over top of the DTX1 shoulder pad. And I might argue a little bit easier than some of the other shoulder pads that we have tested in the past. However, ultimately, doing compressions over the shoulder pad, even the DTX1, was harder than it had to be. So we felt that because it was harder, we would fatigue faster and our high-quality CPR would decline faster. We also found that identifying landmarks for proper hand placement was challenged when the shoulder pads were left in place. And finally, relative to the DTX1 shoulder pad, we also found that our hands would slide on the sternum shield, making it difficult to maintain proper hand placement. So we feel that it is possible to initiate compressions over top of the DTX1 shoulder pad, but this is probably only a good approach to initiate compressions faster, re-engage forward-moving blood flow while we are waiting for additional personnel and resources to give us better access to the chest so that we can perform higher quality compressions. Now, it is important to note that these challenges that we faced with the DTX1 shoulder pad are no different than any other shoulder pad that we have tested in the past. In question number 3, we wanted to assess Riddell's recommended approach to removal of the DTX1 shoulder pad in an emergency situation. Riddell's recommended approach is a 3-step process, where we first remove the sternum shield.
Marcus, if you can.
Then we cut the front plate connector straps.
And you're doing the side strap?
Once you get that done, and the side strap.
And then finally cut the rib belts.
And
We found Riddell's recommended protocol for removing the DTX1 shoulder pad to be very easy and effective, relative to the amount of time it took and also the amount of movement produced during removal of the shoulder pads. Here's a tip. Always cut away from the face. Whether we're cutting the jersey or we're cutting the breastplate connectors or any other straps on any other set of shoulder pads, it's always best practice to cut away from the face. Okay, as promised, as we were going through and answering these questions, we developed a series of tips and tactics that helped us better manage the shoulder pads during an emergency situation, and I want to share those with you. Tactic number 1 involved retracting the shoulder pads rather than removing them initially. To do this, we cut only the rib belts, leaving the front and sternum plate intact.
good.
We retracted the shoulder pads to make sure that they cleared the athlete's nose and face, and then removed them from the athlete. This we found to be a fairly effective approach, especially because there was less cutting involved and less prepping of the shoulder pads for removal. However, this approach is more likely appropriate in a non-traumatic onset situation, because we did find that when we retracted the shoulder pads, there was a little bit of a push from the back of the shoulder pads that caused some movement. So maybe this is an approach reserved for consideration during non-traumatic witness collapses, when we're not as concerned about movement of the cervical spine. Another approach that we thought would be interesting to look at would be to remove the entire breastplate altogether. This involves cutting the rib belts and right and left biothane straps. When we did this, we were able to gain quicker chest access without removing the entire shoulder pad. This might be a benefit during a cardiac arrest when we get full access for compressions and defibrillation. We can then back into removing the entire shoulder pad system when we are prepping for transport.
So
Tactic number 3 involved an approach where we cut the nameplate to remove the sternum plate from the shoulder pad. When we employed this approach, we found it easier to cut down. And that's good because we already talked about how we want to cut away from the athlete's face anyway to avoid injury. All right, that wraps up our review of the Riddell DTX1 shoulder pad. What did we learn? The DTX1 is a pretty cool set of shoulder pads. It uses 3D scanning technology, and it's also cool that Riddell considers emergency management when designing their shoulder pads and their helmets, actually all of their protective athletic equipment. And it's also really cool that Riddell continues to look to SMC to inform their designs, assess their removal protocols, and discover approaches to care. It's up to us as medical providers to become familiar with new technologies so we can continue to drive positive outcomes for the critically injured. I hope this review provided some solid information on the new Riddell DTX1 shoulder pad, and also gives you some information to take back to your medical team to open up conversations not only about the DTX1 shoulder pad, but in shoulder pads and equipment-laden athlete management in general. Okay, a special thank you again to Riddell for their ongoing confidence in sports medicine concepts. And hey, do me a favor, would you? Like this video, subscribe to be notified when new content becomes available, and be sure to leave your questions and comments down below. And also, any suggestions that you have for future in 2 minutes or less sideline review content would be much appreciated. I would love to hear that. Thanks for watching.